On today's episode of Teaching in Higher Ed, number 213, Harold Jarche discusses personal knowledge mastery.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Teaching in Higher Ed. I'm Bonnie Stachowiak, and this is the space where we explore the art and science of being more effective at facilitating learning. We also share ways to improve our productivity approaches so we can have more peace in our lives and be even more present for our students. If you've been a long time listener to the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast, you're already well aware of the earlier episodes around the topic of personal knowledge management, what today's guest calls personal knowledge mastery. It's an essential part of how I do life, how I do learning, and I'm so glad to have today's guest joining me. He is the expert on personal knowledge mastery, Harold Jarche. He is focused on providing actionable insights for workplace learning. He works with individuals, organizations, and public policy influencers to develop practical ways to adapt to the technological, demographic, and societal changes that are facing us today. And Harold has been described as a keen subversive of the last century's management and educational models. His clients appreciate Harold for his extensive experience and network. His internationally renowned blog is a, quote, beacon of light in the dark landscape of organizational learning. And according to one longtime reader, Harold is one of the best thinkers out there on things related to learning and work. Harold helps to identify next practices around collaboration, knowledge sharing, and innovation in an increasingly complex, networked world. As Harold says, work is learning, and learning is the work. Harold Jarche, welcome to Teaching in Higher Ed.
Thanks very much, Bonnie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Today we are talking about the first Google search for people might be personal knowledge management. You distinguish your model, and we'll describe this a little bit more later on, but as personal knowledge mastery. I wonder if we could start in the middle. Could you talk about knowledge?
About knowledge. I mean, it's the difference between information or data, information, and knowledge. There used to be this model, the DIKW model, right? Data, information, knowledge, wisdom. And the generic model was that each one built upon the other. And I don't agree with that model. But because actually, if you have data, you can't turn data into information unless you have the knowledge to understand the data. So knowledge becomes this sort of overarching human component of this taking information and sharing it and personalizing it and understanding things. So knowledge is what we are able to do with the stuff that we either know or what we see or what we interact with. So the knowledge is very much the human side of that thing. As I mean, we can talk about knowledge bases and things like that, but for me, knowledge is that a human sense making of experience and exposure and everything and messy interactions and feelings and culture and all those kinds of things. And that's really what knowledge is, the stuff that we use from which we take action, right? I use my knowledge to, do whatever it is I'm to go to work, to make a decision, to do anything like that. But that's maybe it's not a wonderful dictionary description of it, but it's kind of really a fuzzy place to start.
Let's backtrack a little bit then. Why does this model focus on the personal when we might expect so much of knowledge as we traditionally think about it showing up in a workplace?
Well, I mean, knowledge is, I think, two things. Is that it's personal and it's also social, because none of us, as John Donne said, no man is an island, and that we are the sum of our interactions, our experiences with others. we are social beings, and we are made up of social constructs. So definitely is that knowledge is both of those things, personal and social. And in my PKM framework, I talk about both those things. There's the stuff that you do, but then there's also the stuff that you're doing with others. And in a lot of cases, and quite often it's that pendulum or that shift on the spectrum of some things you're doing very, very personally, and then other things you're doing socially, and then maybe some social interaction, you're reflecting back on that personally. So it's sort of that swinging between the personal and the social. As I've said about PKM, is that PKM in some ways is our individual responsibility of a social contract of being engaged citizens, engaged members of communities. And it's this, if we don't make sense ourselves, how can we help our communities, our societies, get smarter, do better things?
I just want to mention that most of the writing that I've seen on this is around the phrase personal knowledge management. But
Yes.
You've really made an important distinction. I'd like to have you talk now for a while about management versus mastery.
Right. So I called it personal knowledge management because it wasn't my idea. It wasn't my name. Again, I mentioned the three people, and particularly Lilia Efimova, who writes under Mathemagenic. She's now focused more on unschooling. She's lives in the Netherlands. And anyway, Lilia was a great inspiration, was writing a lot about this back in the early 2000s. And she was looking particularly at knowledge management through blogging between researchers, and how that they were this thinking in progress type thing. And so really what I started writing about for myself on my blog was, Lilia's got this wonderful stuff, and Denham Gray is talking about the same thing, and Dave Pollar's talking about that. And I just started, learning out loud. Just sticking this stuff out there and saying, well, I think this is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm doing it, and I'm putting it there. And it really was a very, very small part of my blogging, my consulting, or anything like that. But what happened was over time and over quite a period of time. So I started writing about this in 2004. It would have been 5-6 years later, I think, before some people started picking up. My first client was Domino's Pizza, that wanted to put the PKM framework into their leadership program. And so I realized that, hey, maybe there's something here. I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, the management mastery thing, one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to get away from knowledge management, the field itself, KM. And by just slapping a P on the KM, it made it look like it was part of the KM world. And I still don't see PKM as part of KM. I have a different perspective on it, but really it's because it's a capital P. It's got to be personal. Is that there's no one model. I've had tech companies contact me. We want to have a PKM technology. And I think, no, every single individual has to develop their own, because if you don't develop your own practice, you're not going to continue with it. And then in discussions with practice, and I think it was inside one of my communities of practice, actually, we were talking about it, and they said, Harold, it's not management, it's mastery. I went, yeah, you're right, it is. And no one else was talking about it. So why don't you change it to personal knowledge mastery? And I said, yeah. And the more I use it, the more sense it makes to me, because it's about a person mastering a discipline to which you are never, ever going to get to the end. Mm-hmm. It's like Zen. It's like any other type of yoga, whatever, is that you can always improve. You can always get better. There is no, okay, check. I've got it. I'm finished. Off I go. So that's why the mastery thing, I think, because you see this as a lifelong journey and not just as a check mark or a certificate and then away you go, which is another reason I don't give out certificates.
You break personal knowledge mastery down into 3 parts. I'd like to explore each part with you now, and then maybe hold off a little bit on talking about specific tools. And then at the end, we'll get really practical with, what do you use? I can share what I use, but it's less about the tools, of course, and far more about the practice. So talk about seek, and then we'll get to sense and share. So how is seek part of PKM?
Well, the seek part is really about looking out, is in seeking, and there's a number of different things you can seek. One is the big part is seeking diversity. is seeking diversity of opinion, seeking diversity of perspective, because we know that we need to get other ways of, I mean, if we're dealing with complex problems, which is or complex situations, which most of us are and most of us will be, is that we know the research is solid on that, is that in diversity is strength. So when I talk to people about the seeking part, is that okay? Let's think about your professional social networks. Is who are you connecting with? I run a series of questions. Okay, who do you talk to if you have if you have a real problem? If you're going to make a career change or something like that, who do you talk to? And let's take a look at those people and see who they are. And then okay, let's categorize them. And when it comes to diversity, there's no rule about okay, I have to have 50% women, 50% men, anything like that. However, diversity in general, we can say, am I getting diverse perspectives or am I not? And if it's all middle-aged men from my culture, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Am I getting gender diversity? Am I getting cultural diversity? Am I getting educational diversity? All those kinds of things. So I get people thinking about diversity and I think the most important type of diversity is diversity of opinion. So my PKM skills become skills around where maybe I'm going to set up a temporary list or a temporary thread or something like that, where I'm seeing this stuff. So I'm getting multiple perspectives, and I'm going to get, in Canada, we've got about 5 parties, and we get members from each of the 5 parties, and then maybe some special interest groups who are talking about these kinds of things. And that's what I use to understand hydrofracturing, because this was a big issue here, and I didn't know it, and I'm not a physicist, I'm not an environmental scientist, and I wanted to really figure this stuff out. So I actually had this little research place where I was using different tools, and I was getting as much information on hydrofracking as possible to try to make up my mind on, the good, the bad, the ugly of that. So again, because you do this, you become a better curator. And as a better curator, you hopefully become a better sense maker.
The second component of PKM is sensing. What is sense, and why is it such a vital part of the process?
It's the toughest part. It's the part that is almost impossible to teach. When people understand sense making, it's kind of like they get there's an aha moment, and they finally go, that's what this is all about. Okay. Now I get it. But it's not the kind of thing, and when I run the workshops, is that sometimes people get it at the beginning, some people never get it. Sense making is, how do you take this stuff, and then how do you actually do something with it so it changes your opinion, your perspective, your behavior. And that's where the sense-making thing, you've got to do something, right? Doing could be writing a blog post, right? That's where you're forcing yourself to put the stuff together, to write it, and to stick it out there in public. Doing could be having a conversation, and it's good to do, or public speaking, because when you present the stuff publicly, you can be criticized publicly. So you do your homework, right? And it depends what it is. And one of the things working with people is that everybody has a different way of doing their sense making. There's a great example from Madeline Blair. I don't know if you know her. She's written a number of books so in this general area. Writing the Current was one of her books. And Madeline and I have talked over the years, and she was talking about a person that she knows that at the end of the day they drive home, and what she does is that she talks to herself about what she saw and what she thought during the day. She actually thinks and learns out loud, like really out loud. She says, people looking at her sometimes talking to herself in the car think that she's a little crazy, but that's for her is the sense-making thing. So part of PKM is helping people find a sense-making practice or practices that they will continue for a long period of time. And it takes a while. And we're going to talk about tools later. Sometimes it's trying new tools, trying them out, seeing if they work for you or they don't, discarding them, trying something new. That's part of the adventure too. Oh, let me try this out. I mean, Helen Blunden, a friend of mine in Australia, who's been doing Activate Learn is her company. She's really pushes things out, and she's shown how you can use Snapchat for learning really, really well.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, so essentially, so I get, there's great inspiration from other people out there doing that.
I'm laughing so hard because Snapchat is one of those tools that I have to pick up, once a year or whatever, just to make myself feel ridiculous because I completely don't get it. And I'm just so clumsy and just never master it. But I'm like, I can make myself look like a hot dog on Snapchat. And my kids just, every time they ever saw that icon, they wanted to make themselves look like puppies or hot dogs. But that's never been.
I don't get Snapchat either. I'm of a certain age, I guess, that maybe I will or I don't. But I mean, and that's where, Jay Cross, we talked about him, my friend, colleague, who passed away a couple of years ago, and wrote the first book on informal learning, really. And Jay was always one to try something new, try something different, and I think that's part of it, is you get yourself out there. Back in 2004, I think maybe 2005, we ran an online workshop. It was around. It was all about sense making using social media for informal learning, and we had this worldwide audience, and across 20 different time zones. And we, smart guys that we were, right, is that we decided that because you have to know the tools and you have to learn how to do this stuff. Is that we hosted each weekly session on a different platform.
Oh, wow.
We had one time, we went through 3 platforms before we got things going. We'll say, oh, this one's blown up on us. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one. But what I learned doing that is that again, part of that whole notion of putting yourself out there. I think that's what a lot of adults, and that's what our society has been all about. Get the right marks, get the check mark, graduate and move on. CEOs don't want to be shown as being stupid or ignorant or anything like that. So they don't venture out on that because, can't look bad. And all those everything's got to be massaged and perfect and things like that. And PKM is this messy thing that, I call my blog, the place where I put my half-baked ideas, and you can't bake an idea unless you get some half-baked ones first, I think. And that's part of the sense making too. And the more you do this, the better you get. 15 years ago, I was a really bad writer, and now I write professionally. It's kind of like, God, I remember people telling me I should write a blog. What that stupid idea? Yeah, come on, no, you're right. And finally, I had a friend of mine sat me down. He says, "You're coming to my house for a beer, and I got my laptop here, and I'm going to show you what this thing." And went through. And the same thing happened to me for Twitter when somebody said, "You better get on Twitter." And with both of them is that, when I started, it was kind of like, okay, I'm doing it, writing this kind of stuff. And, you look at my early blog posts and they're very, very short, and there wasn't a bunch to it. And it isn't until after that you get that a year, 2 years, whatever, 15 years there. And then you realize that I have this treasure trove of, like you have it for infertility. I have other ones, maybe not on the blog, but in other areas, for student resources that I developed for our boys as they were going through school, unschooling, because we were seriously looking at unschooling our children, and so putting all those resources, all those curated things, and I've shared them over the years with other people. I had another one on social media use policies, which for a while a lot of people were going like, we need an official policy. So I started collecting and curating from all these different companies around the world and what they were doing. But yeah, you're right. It's you only see things in hindsight, right? It's the difference between you look at a complex adaptive system, right? And that in a machine, something that's complicated, the relationship between cause and effect is seeable, right? I can see, if I do this, that happens. With a complex system, which all humans are, the relationship between cause and effect is only seen in retrospect. It's only after you've dealt with your teenager that you realize why things happened the way that they happened. The other thing is that they're not going to happen the same way the next time, because this is a complex adaptive system. But over time, you start seeing patterns and putting these things together. So it's like a physical fitness program. It's like reading regularly. It's like you don't get you don't get the lesson until quite a ways afterwards. And when you go, oh yeah, this is really good. That's why it's really, really, it's tough. And it takes work.
The last part of the process is to share. And can you talk about this process and why it's important?
Well, the sharing part, I think it's important for a number of different things, whether it's in your work or whether it's with your family or your community or anything like that, is that one thing that I advise people to do is that whatever you do is that make it shareable, right? Which is not quite the same as sharing. Okay, make it shareable, and then quite often another thing that I promote is add value to the knowledge. Okay, so before sharing, one of the things I try to do on Twitter is that if there's an interesting link to an article and someone just links the article, I go and I read through the article and I go, that's interesting, is I'll quote something additional out of that article, which I think is sort of like a key thing. So now you have two pieces of information about that article as opposed to just one. Or I'll add value to it in terms of, hey, I think this is good for X, Y, and Z type things. The other thing is that, we talked about bookmarks, is that, okay, that's interesting. But if I come to you and I say, look, I have this specific thing that I'm interested in. Okay. Well, what I can do is I can go into my social bookmarks. Let's say you have 500 in there, right? And you can search through and for this specific thing, and you can go, yeah, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, and you can add another tag. Okay, so this is for Mary Lou. You add Mary Lou onto the tag, and you say these are the 5 articles I think that would be the best for you. It hasn't taken you much extra time. Had you not done those 500, you wouldn't have that curated list on top of it. But you've added value because of the timing. Right? You are sharing this when this person is open to accept them. So I think that part of the sharing too is doing it. You share when, where, why things are all together. In some cases, I know like when I share lessons learned, sometimes they come from work I've done several years ago because I didn't want to share anything that could be perhaps client confidential information. But 3-4 years after the fact, it's no longer really confidential. I talk about it generally, and now it's appropriate to share it.
Yeah, I think that's really a helpful way. I talked a little bit about a future orientation when it comes to sense making. Then there's this future orientation to sharing. I had not, as much of your stuff as I had read, it hadn't stuck in my noggin about the making it shareable. Doesn't necessarily mean I have to share it right now, but just with thinking with that orientation that it could be shareable. That's nice. I was thinking the other day in the Slack channel for Teaching in Higher Ed, someone said, I'm looking for contacts around accessibility because we're really starting to figure out we have to get that doing better at our institution. Who has contacts? And I thought, well, I don't really have contacts, but here's a link to all my bookmarks on my bookmarking tool around accessibility. And then it was funny because throughout the day I realized, oh, actually, I do have contacts, and I found a listserv that I'm a member of, and I was like, oh, I had bookmarked these as possible guests because I don't know that I've done a good enough job on the podcast around accessibility. And so I was able to go back into Slack and say, not only could you surf through my bookmarks, which he said was really helpful, but I realized actually these potential guests that I had saved in another place, I have just a list just for potential guests. This might be helpful to you as well. So it's really when we have these systems. This was my disparity of systems. I've got potential guests and bookmarks, and they hadn't quite connected in this instance. But there's also the body of knowledge that is, building up just in terms of my own brain and how it works through these connections.
Yeah, I know. I like your talking to your future self. I think that's a very good way of thinking about this. Is that it's like it's like planting a garden. You're not going to harvest it when you plant it, right?
Yeah, and sometimes the raw in the moment things are beautiful to read from people. I mean, they are helping to change communities and change minds and change hearts. And sometimes the messiness of immediate reactions to things, that's not my forte, and that's not where I want to start. So I like to sort of have things circle around a bit before I share.
Well, here's one sort of final thing on the sharing side of things is that we all have some expertise, we all have some knowledge or whatever. And I do leadership development. And one of the things I talk about is that leadership in the network era is helping make your network smarter, stronger, more resilient, able to make better decisions. And I take it back to I don't want to live in a network or a community that's dumb, because they're going to make decisions that I don't think are right. Right? It may be about where we're going to put a 4-lane highway through the middle of our small town, right? Because we want people to go much faster or something like that, right? Well, I want people to be able to make decisions about of the impacts of that. So me sharing and putting things together and sharing models and ways of looking at things are ways in which I hope that I can help make my network make better decisions. So if you think about that from a democratic perspective, isn't that what we all should be doing so that we collectively are making better decisions for our society?
Let's talk about tools. And just for the audience listening, I wanted to mention that I will be linking to all the tools that Harold shares. And we will not be doing a how-to, however, but if I have tutorials, I will link to them, to ones that I have if they've been particularly helpful to me. So we're just going to rattle off some tools and then get to the recommendation segment. So what tools do you find particularly helpful in seeking?
So again, I'm very tool agnostic. I actually don't use that many tools. I do try a lot of different ones out there. So, my general tools for the most part haven't changed a lot. So I use an aggregator, right? I use a feed reader because that's a good way to read a whole bunch of different things. I'm currently using InnoReader. I've used, a listing. I think I went through my Furl, Bloglines, Magnolia, Google Reader, Feedly. Yes, I've gone through them all. Magnolia had 2 servers and they both blew up on the same day. I lost everything on that one. So, but just some way in which you can automate bringing stuff in. And there's a whole bunch of different tools, if this, then that, and different ones. But I think you want to have some way of bringing in your collected feeds of news and information and opinion. And if you can get that all into one place. So I think that's some type of thing to bring it in, and some type of aggregation device. And there's a whole bunch of different ones now that I don't even know them all anymore. In terms of tools, though, do link to Jane Hart's Top Tools site. And anybody who's listening on this, please participate in the poll, which finishes in September. She's always looking for what are your top tools for learning, as well explained on there. You'll put it on the link. So for seeking, that's probably the big one, is bringing that in. Twitter and LinkedIn are 2 networks I'm active on. I left Facebook years ago because I don't like Mark Zuckerberg's business model, but those are places where I'm getting information because I'm connected to a lot of people. So I connect to people, I seek out different people, and then I have different ways of sort of filtering that through. And a lot of it, because I've been online long enough now, is I'm getting them through other people who are saying, hey, Harold, I think you'd like that. So those are sort of like the main seeking tools that I'm using. So, and the ones that I've used for, I think, Twitter since 2007, and aggregators since 2000, I don't know, somewhere in there. So quite a while.
About tools for sense.
Yeah, sense making is, again, it's the toughest one. And I've used different ones, but I'm a blogger. My blog is where it all happens. It is the core of my processing. This is where I work out loud. This is where I learn out loud. That's the public sense making. Okay. I also have private sense making, right? So I'm an active member. You mentioned Slack. I'm active in several Slack communities that are private, and we're not allowed to share without permission from everybody else. And we talk about some pretty confidential things. It's also a place where we can talk about things like, hey, I'm doing this contract with this company. How much should I charge them? That's not something I'm going to put on my blog. So internally are these communities. I'm using Zoom a lot now and Zoom also has long-term chat function. So I have a pro account. So we have a number of threaded discussion groups within Zoom that I have with my partners and colleagues around the world. So that's where I'm doing the raw stuff that doesn't even make it to the blog, those kinds of ideas and things that circle around in there. And then, I would not really call Twitter a sense-making tool. LinkedIn isn't. So in terms of online sense-making, it would be the blog. And then the thing is that the blog is the half-baked ideas, but then I'm doing now about every year is I'm taking all of my blog posts and I'm putting them into an ebook. Right, so I now have 5 of those out, and there I'm trying to add another layer of value and putting this together, not just sort of sticking blog posts after each, but getting the themes together, researching it more, really making it a coherent narrative as it goes through. So that would sort of be the higher level of that. My public speaking and my client work is the other part in terms of sense making, right? Is that I'm taking notes, I'm going to conferences, I'm putting this stuff together, and then I'm publishing it where is appropriate. So it's all those kinds of things. But really, for me, the core thing is the blog.
And how about for the social bookmarks you had mentioned earlier?
Right. Yeah. The social bookmarks. Yeah. They're kind of halfway between seeking and sense making. Right. So social bookmarks, I currently use Digo. I've used other ones. There's other tools like Scoop It that people can use. But really what it is that when I come across something, I do a pretty quick triage. I come across something. Is it interesting? I may tweet it and then I add the heart to the tweet because I review my favorites every 2 weeks, writing up my little Friday's finds. So that's one. I may think, no, this is a long-term keeper, and that's where I'll use a social bookmark. Why? Because it's now findable and searchable. And I think there's lots of different videos and stuff on how to use social bookmarks. Yeah, the first step in PKM with people who really don't know about this stuff, as I say, first thing you want to do is free your bookmarks. Use a social bookmark system, even if it's private. Doesn't really matter. So that's where it's shareable, but you don't have to share. So you can make all of them private, but now you can access them from multiple computers, right? And if these are things for you professionally, do you want to keep them on, an institutional computer that maybe you don't have 6 months, 12 months down the road? So so the bookmarking is a great repository. What I always suggest is at least clip the most important part of what you think was in that article. So I read an article, I save it into my bookmark, I put a clip in there. I may then add a comment. This would be good for this, this, and this. And then I add the metadata, the tags, right? So I'll, social media, learning, knowledge, whatever. And don't worry about what those tags are because over time you'll figure them out and straighten them out. So use as many as possible. And a good friend of mine who's in one of my private communities of practice is Thomas Vanderwall. If you know Thomas was the fellow who coined the term folksonomy. So folksonomy, as opposed to a taxonomy, is the aggregate people tagging things, right? And then we see, everybody's using this term. This is now going to be the term that we use. So a folksonomy is a bottom-up taxonomy developed by people interacting with knowledge.
I really appreciate you saying that, of course, because it agrees with my current practice. So we always love those things, but also because it can be fixed. I mean, every tool I've ever used, I could merge two tags together and problem solve. So we could just get the tag in there and worry about it later. If it's not, perfectly matched, you put an S on one and you didn't put an S on the other, you can correct that later on.
And I mean, it's the whole notion of knowledge flow as opposed to creating these fully baked products. And that's the big challenge, I think, for a lot of people is, because, we have to have the perfect PowerPoint ready for the boss to sign off, as opposed to, I got like these 50 different things that, they're kind of crappy right now, but, give me half a day and I can put them all together.
Mm-hmm. Right. What about tools for sharing?
Yeah, tools for sharing is I usually look at, where people are. And actually the best tool for sharing would be Facebook, but just for personal and ethical reasons, I don't use Facebook. Just came out that 84% of Canadians are on Facebook. So I'm one of the 16% that aren't. But if the tools you use for sense making are shareable, then the sharing part's kind of taken care of. So if I write my personal narrative on my blog, it's automatically shareable. People can subscribe to the RSS feed. People can subscribe by email. They can find it through Google, all that kind of stuff. So I've made it shareable. So I think a lot of cases, we talked about earlier, it's not so much about the sharing as being ready to share when the moment arrives. I've done this many times. When Jane Hart and I work together and we'll be sitting with a client and they'll be talking about some subject or something like that. And then she'll just sort of go, I'm sure Harold has written a blog post on that subject. And I go, yeah, I think so. So the whole notion of having the stuff out there so that when the moment arrives, you've got something.
This is the point in the show where we each get to share some recommendations. And I just wanted to mention that the social bookmarking tool that I like a lot is actually not very social. In fact, the founder designed it such that it wasn't that you don't set up groups on it. People can come see it. If anyone that visited my page, anything I've chosen to have be public can be, but it's not like a social network in and of itself. And so it's called Pinboard. It's pinboard.in. And the reason I like it is just that it's such a simpler interface just to look at. You've got a cloud of tags, and the cloud, of course, if I use a tag more, that word appears larger in the cloud. And so you could visually go there and see, which of her bookmarks does she save more things about than others. But because Digo I like a lot, but right now when I'm having my doctoral students use it, they like it because they like to highlight things and the annotation and it stays, but it's so cluttered visually, and particularly because that's how they fund their business model. So there's a lot of advertising up there and they get confused between when am I being advertised to and when am I just, is that a bookmark that I actually saved? I do like Digo a lot. I recommend it a lot. In fact, that's what I recommend because I try to have them not have to pay for too many things when they're just testing them out. But Pinboard is great because of its simplicity. And then my last recommendation, I'll pass it over to Harold, is he mentioned Jane Hart's top tools list. This would be a great way for you to make some sense of some of the tools that you use and also to share them. She does it every year. I can't remember how many years she's been doing it, but
11.
Yeah. So just you could write a quick blog post, but she even just has a form you can fill out. I mean, she makes it very, very easy to compile your list. And it's so fun every year to see what the tallied results are.
Yeah, and Jane actually goes through every individual contribution.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Personally, so this is hand curated, as they say. It's a really valuable resource, and that's what it's one of the exercises I do. The PKM workshop is I get people to go to Jane's site, take a look at the top tools, and select one that they never used, and then I want you to test it out, and I want you to tell people what you think about it.
Wonderful. Well, Harold, what do you have to recommend for us today?
Okay, first of all, you talked about Digo, and one thing that I recommend is that there's nothing wrong with testing out free tools, but if the tool is useful, pay for it. I've gone through so many of these systems that have gone bankrupt, right? Is that these people need to make money, so pay for them. And so I pay for Digo. And so I don't get the advertisements and stuff like that. And I pay for InnoReader, which is my aggregator, and the rest of them. So that would be the number one thing: is it get something that requires you to pay for it, and then get the better quality. I have a tool that I recommend to everybody, and I was able even to get my wife using it. And it's not a learning tool. It's not a seek sense sharing tool. It's a make my life way easier tool. And it's a password manager. So I use 1Password, which is the number one password. It's a Canadian company that's been around for a number of years, pretty stable. And what it does is it lets me generate passwords, and I have them in these secure vaults on all of my computers. And so I now have a unique 20-digit or so password for every single site that I use. When I log out, I log in. It just finds it, click, 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 and I've logged into the system, and I'm good to go. So I only remember 1Password, which is the master password, to get into that. That has made my life so much easier. When Yahoo, for the 15th time in a row, says, "Oh, our database has been compromised," I just go in, generate new password. It's different from any other password, so I have much more resilience in that system. If you look at most of these hacks and dumps that have happened, is that quite like these celebrities who, nude photos have been found that they were sharing on whatever system it was, is that if you actually take a look at what password they were using, you can go like, that was just dumb, right? Mm-hmm. And this way, let a machine make your password, because it's a machine that's going to try to break it. And I don't think any human can build a password that's as good. Plus, I don't have to think about it. I click, I take, and when you go to the site and it says, oh, it has to be 8 characters and this and this and this, you just go click, 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 click. You set your parameters, you go generate a new one. Yep. I mean, why does anybody want to be generating their own passwords? It's just crazy. But it took like 6 months of my friend to beat on my head and say, Harold, you got to do this.
Oh, yeah.
So I think for me, that's the tool that I think is number one.
Well, Harold, it has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you in person, and I can see your face too here on Zoom, which we're using today for the session. And I'm just so honored to get to talk to you and get to know you a little bit more. And thank you so much for all of your work.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks very much.
Hope we can get some clients coming your way. And I would love to see undergraduate programs adopt this model and get this happening with, as you said, not just with master's levels, but with our students just as they come in. Imagine the power of that.
Yeah, I've got a lot on PK Mastery on the blog, and anybody wants to take the workshops, I run them. Next one starting 16th of July, I think. So we run, and it's kind of neat because it's people from all over the world. So it's kind of nice that you get diverse opinions there too.
It's been wonderful to talk to you. What an honor it has been to be able to talk to Harold Jarche today. I'm so grateful for his contribution, of course, not just to this episode, but truly to my life, to my lifelong learning. Thank you so much for joining us today as a guest, Harold, and thank you for your blog, for your prolific presence in this space of trying to navigate complex systems in a complex world. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you have yet to subscribe to the weekly email, that'll keep you up to date on the links. I've got so many links on this particular episode with Harold Jarche. Went a little crazy taking notes. And if you want to not have to remember to go to the episode notes, but get them in your inbox, you can just go to teachinginhighered.com/subscribe. You'll get a single email, and that'll help you stay up to date. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.